I still remember the day Jake called me about his new photography project. Jake and I had been friends for almost 3 years by then, having met at a gallery opening where we both stood in front of the same abstract piece for nearly 20 minutes, debating whether the artist was making a statement about urban isolation or just really liked the color blue. Jake was the kind of photographer who saw the world differently. He had this uncanny ability to capture moments that most people missed, those fleeting expressions or interactions that revealed something true about human connection. He was tall with perpetually tousled dark hair that he was always pushing out of his eyes, and he had this infectious enthusiasm that made even his most experimental ideas seem completely reasonable. When my phone rang that afternoon, I was lounging in my apartment, trying to finish a novel I'd been working on for months. "Max," he said, his voice crackling with that familiar excitement that always preceded his best ideas. "I need your help with a new series I'm working on. It's about vulnerability and connection, real, unguarded moments between people. And I immediately thought of you." I wasn't a model by any stretch of the imagination. At 32, I was a moderately successful writer with an average build and what my last boyfriend had called thoughtfully intense brown eyes. But Jake had photographed me before for various projects, and there was always something comfortable about being in front of his lens. "What exactly did you have in mind?" I asked, already knowing I'd probably say yes regardless of his answer. "I've been experimenting with low-light photography," he explained, his words coming faster as his excitement built. "There's something about the way shadows play across faces when there's barely enough light to see. It creates this incredible intimacy, like you're witnessing something you're not supposed to. And I want to try using colored gels, specifically red. The way it transforms everything makes it feel both warm and slightly dangerous. Let me explain why this matters in photography. Colored gels completely transform the emotional impact of an image. Red, in particular, carries so much symbolic weight. It's the color of passion, danger, love, heat. It changes how we perceive skin tones, how textures appear, how shadows fall. In the right setting, it can make even the most ordinary moment feel charged with meaning. Jake had recently leased a small loft space in an old converted factory building downtown for his studio work. The space itself was a photographer's dream. 16-foot ceilings, massive windows along one wall that he could black out when needed, exposed brick, and worn wooden floors that told a century's worth of stories through their scuffs and stains. "The loft would be perfect," he continued. "The industrial feel, the rawness of it. It's exactly the backdrop I need." I agreed to meet him there the following evening. As I hung up the phone, I felt a familiar flutter of anticipation in my stomach. There had always been something unspoken between Jake and me, a current of attraction that we'd never acknowledged directly. We'd both dated other people during our friendship, and the timing had never seemed right to explore whatever existed between us. But lately, those moments of lingering eye contact or the brush of his hand against mine had been happening more frequently, carrying more weight. When I arrived at the loft the next evening, the space had been transformed. Jake had cleared most of the furniture to one side, leaving a large open area in the center of the room. He'd set up a simple backdrop, just a weathered canvas drop cloth hanging from the ceiling. The large windows were covered with heavy black fabric, blocking out the city lights. The only illumination came from two small lights positioned on either side of the space, both covered with deep red gels that bathed everything in a crimson glow. "What do you think?" Jake asked, gesturing around the space. In the red light, his features looked different, more defined, his cheekbones casting sharp shadows, his eyes darker and more intense. "It's atmospheric," I replied, moving further into the room. The red light transformed everything, making the familiar space feel like somewhere else entirely, somewhere more intimate, more charged. "How exactly do you want to do this?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, a habit I'd always found endearing. "I've been thinking about that. This series is about authentic connection, right? So I don't want anything posed or artificial. I thought maybe we could just talk, move around the space naturally, and I'll capture moments as they happen." "That sounds easy enough," I said, though something in his expression told me there was more. "There's one specific shot I have in mind," he continued, his voice dropping slightly. "It's about that moment of first physical contact between two people, when there's all this potential energy, All these unspoken feelings, and then finally, there's touch. That's what I want to capture. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how alone we were in this space, how the red light seemed to pulse around us like a living thing. Between us, you mean? He nodded, holding my gaze. If you're comfortable with that. It doesn't have to be anything dramatic, just authentic. Whatever feels natural. The air between us seemed to thicken. We'd touched before, of course, friendly hugs, casual contact, but this felt different. This was acknowledging something we'd been dancing around for years. Let's start with just talking, I suggested, needing to break the tension before it overwhelmed me. Get comfortable with the space, with the light. Jake agreed, setting his camera on a nearby table, but keeping it within reach. We sat on the floor, cross-legged like children, facing each other in the crimson glow. We talked about everything and nothing. His recent trip to photograph landscapes in Iceland, my struggles with my current writing project, a mutual friend's disastrous dinner party where the smoke alarm had gone off 3 separate times. As we talked, Jake occasionally picked up his camera, capturing moments without directing me. I gradually forgot to be self-conscious, lulled by the familiar rhythm of our conversation and the strangely intimate atmosphere created by the red light. You know, Jake said after a while, lowering his camera, I've been thinking a lot about why we're so afraid to be vulnerable with the people who matter most to us. I raised an eyebrow. That's quite a pivot in conversation. He laughed softly. Sorry, occupational hazard. Photographers are always thinking about what's beneath the surface. He paused, considering his words. But seriously, don't you find it strange? We'll tell strangers on the internet our deepest thoughts, but with people we actually care about, we hold back. We're so afraid of rejection that we never take the risk. His words resonated with me, particularly given what had remained unspoken between us for so long. I think it's because the stakes are higher, I offered. The more someone matters to you, the more their rejection would hurt. Jake nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful in the red glow. But what about the cost of never knowing? Of always wondering what might have happened if you'd been brave enough to be honest? I knew we weren't just speaking hypothetically anymore. My heart was pounding so loudly I was certain he could hear it. That has its own kind of pain, I admitted quietly. He set his camera down completely and moved closer to me, still sitting cross-legged, but now our knees were almost touching. Max, he said, my name sounding different somehow in the quiet of the red-lit loft. I've wanted to tell you something for a long time. The air between us felt electric. I could see the red light reflecting in his eyes, casting half his face in shadow while illuminating the other half. What is it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering immediately, Jake slowly raised his hand, hesitating for just a moment before reaching toward my face. The anticipation of his touch was almost overwhelming. I could feel it like a physical presence between us, years of unspoken feelings condensed into this single moment. When his fingertips finally made contact with my cheek, it was like a current passing between us. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, as he traced the line of my jaw. I heard the soft click of the camera. He must have triggered it remotely with his other hand, but I couldn't look away from his eyes. This, he said softly, answering my question. This is what I've wanted to tell you. I leaned into his touch, my eyes closing briefly. When I opened them again, I reached up and placed my hand over his. I've been waiting to hear it, I replied. The red light around us seemed to intensify, or maybe it was just my awareness of it heightening in that moment. Every sensation was amplified, the warmth of his skin against mine, the sound of our breathing in the quiet loft, the way the wooden floor felt beneath me. I was acutely conscious of crossing a threshold, of our friendship transforming into something else entirely. Jake leaned forward slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, but I remained where I was, drawn toward him by a force that had been building for 3 years. When our lips finally met, it was soft and questioning at first, then deepening as we both realized this was exactly where we wanted to be. I heard the camera click again, capturing this moment of connection, of boundaries dissolving. When we eventually pulled apart, Jake rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I've been wanting to do that since that ridiculous argument about the blue painting, he confessed with a small laugh. I smiled, my hand still resting on his cheek. Why did you wait so long? He opened his eyes, meeting mine. Fear, I guess. Fear of ruining what we already had. You're too important to me to lose. I'm not going anywhere, I assured him, the red light wrapping around us like a cocoon. Jake reached for his camera, checking the images he'd captured. Come look, he said, shifting so we could both see the small screen. The photographs were stunning. The red gel had transformed ordinary moments into something almost otherworldly. There we were, two figures bathed in crimson, the moment of our first touch captured forever. The image had a raw intimacy to it that was almost difficult to look at, like witnessing something deeply private. That's exactly what I was trying to capture, Jake said quietly, his shoulder pressed against mine as we looked at the photos. That moment when everything changes. We spent the rest of the evening in that red-lit loft, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, sometimes with Jake photographing me or us together using the remote trigger. The boundaries of our friendship had been redrawn, and we were exploring this new territory with both excitement and care. There was no rush, no pressure, just the recognition of something that had always been there, finally acknowledged. As the night grew later, we lay on the floor side by side, looking up at the ceiling washed in red light. Jake's hand found mine, our fingers intertwining. Do you know what I love about photography? He asked. What's that? I turned my head to look at his profile. It forces you to be present, to really see what's in front of you, not what you expect or want to see. He squeezed my hand gently. I've been seeing you, Max. All this time. The simplicity and honesty of his words moved me deeply. I've been seeing you too, I replied. I just didn't know if I was allowed to look. He turned to face me, his expression serious in the red glow. I want you to look. I want to look at you too. No more pretending we don't see each other. That night in the loft marked the beginning of something new between us. The photographs Jake took became the centerpiece of his next exhibition, a series he called First Touch that explored moments of vulnerability and connection. The image of our initial contact, my face illuminated by red light as his hand touched my cheek, was the signature piece. Critics praised the raw intimacy of the work, the way it made viewers feel like witnesses to something deeply personal. What none of the critics knew was how that night had changed both our lives. How a photography project had finally given us the courage to acknowledge what had been building between us for years. How red gel lighting had somehow illuminated not just our faces, but everything we'd been keeping in shadow. It's been 2 years since that night in the loft. Jake and I now share an apartment with better natural light for his photography and a small office where I can write. Sometimes, when I'm struggling with words, I look at the framed photograph on my desk, two people bathed in red light, reaching for each other across what seems like both inches and miles. It reminds me that the most important stories are often the ones we're most afraid to tell, and that some connections are worth the risk of reaching out, worth stepping into the light, no matter what color it might be. Total _char_count, 17,593.